From Social Prosperity Partners, this is Community Catalysts. Welcome to Community Catalysts, the podcast that examines the qualities of community leadership and the many paths and forms it can take. I'm your host, Matt Lehrman. Last week, we started a conversation with Doug McLennan, the founder and editor of ArtsJournal, who for 25 years has been a thought leader and community catalyst at the confluence of arts and culture, journalism, and technology. Today, we continue that conversation. We've talked about journalism, we've talked about arts. Let's talk about technology. And I know the one thing that you really want to focus on a lot is artificial intelligence. So if you don't mind, I'm going to just drive us right there. I want to quote what you just wrote in one of your recent blog posts, because you say it so succinctly, and I just want to make sure that I'm hearing it right. To an AI model, a picture is data, sound and music are data, and as is traditional spoken or written language. That data is translatable, interchangeable, and most importantly, linkable and actionable. That means that video, music, sound, movement, image can interact in a common language. And I just want to make sure this is a profound evolution of the way we can understand and manage information and communicate, right? I don't want to undersell this. This is big.
Huge. It's going to change everything about how we do business. And it's easy to get distracted by tools. It's easy to get distracted by toys. I can say, hey, I got the AI to write me a Hemingway novel, and it's not that great right now. Well, actually, that's just a distraction. That's like baby steps. It's going to be such a bigger thing than that, ultimately, and so much better at doing things than we are, and much more quickly, right? The other aspect of this that I think people fail to understand is that progress on this is moving at exponential rate. We're used to, Moore's law, the processor speed doubles every year. That seemed pretty amazing, right? Because, and look at how fast our transistors are. We're talking at an exponential rate where I just heard Jensen Huang, who's the CEO of NVIDIA, was giving a talk the other day and basically said that the processor speed is going to be 1,000,000 times or right now is 1,000,000 times faster than it was last year. Will be even 1,000,000 times faster next year. He's talking about processors that used to be entire data centers, right? Like, Costco-sized buildings filled with computers, now fits on one little processor, which granted costs an awful lot of money, but takes a infinitesimal fraction of the energy costs that it used to power that big data processing center. The progress on this is moving so fast that we just don't actually have the capacity to even imagine what that means, right? When everything is an exponential increase. The rate of change, we just, it's hard to even conceive. So this time next year, things that seem impossible right now will be, every day.
Doug, I want to take you out of the realm of what the technology itself is doing and talk about where it's going. There is an abundance of movies and television that paint bleak, dystopian, Terminator kind of futures. But rather than kind of dwelling in grim scenarios, I'm just wondering, do you have a vision yourself of what if not a utopian, at least a more positive vision of the future looks like?
I see those right at the moment. I can give the AI every protein model out there and ask it, what does it see and how can it fix? It's doing cancer treatments right now. Climate change, do we need to figure out climate change? Yes. I think that 5 years from now, you'll look back at this and go, I couldn't have imagined that this this was what was going to happen, right? It's a whole different paradigm shift in how we have to think about things. Like, for instance, so copyright, right? Copyright was designed, copyright came into being in the late 1700s, 1790, as a way of not protecting creative work, but it was intended as a way to spur creativity, give people an incentive to be creative. They will, and they own that work for a period of time, and that will spur other innovation. And so that was the whole idea behind it. Now AI comes along, and instead of creating copies, right, which is what our laws are designed, it says if you make a copy of this and you don't attribute or you don't pay a royalty, then that's not legal. It trains on all of the articles in the New York Times, for instance, and it doesn't reproduce those articles. It doesn't make copies of them. It doesn't reproduce any sentence of it, but it takes the essence of it.
It ingests it and turns it into something else.
It learns the rules. It learns, the style. It learns the character, and it can do that with artists. There's the famous example of Drake. Somebody had the AI create a song that sounded, it was Drake singing the song, but it wasn't. It was what we call a synthetic piece of music. And it got downloaded like 1 million times in 24 hours, and people really liked it. There's no way to sue about that because he didn't copy anything. He didn't take anything. What the AI did was it learned the essence of the artist and it created something new. That's why that's what the generative is in generative AI. Up until now, the computer, the online world, the computer world has been about curating information. AI is about generating new things based on the old thing. Well, ownership of anything that's an intellectual, idea or style or art form or whatever, we have no protections for that. And so it means we've got to think about what does it actually mean to own something? And that applies for all the things around us, right? I could use an AI and generate a new version of a cup or, anything in the physical world ultimately. And did I steal somebody's information? No, I basically took the ideas behind it and generated a new idea.
Do you oppose the idea of the AIs being able to ingest the essence of this? Or do you think that the copyright protection needs to be stronger and prevent the AIs from having that access?
No, I think every artist in the world is the product of every other artist and experience in the world, right? It's like you don't learn in a vacuum. You don't become somebody who can create something in a vacuum. It's you're taking in things around you all the time. And if you're a good artist, you have a way of synthesizing that and creating something new that resonates with people. And that's essentially what the AI is doing, right? And so we can't prohibit that, right? Used to be a very defined line between you were either the artist on the one side or you're the audience on the other side, and one gave to the other and the other gave back to the other. And that's how it worked, right? In the digital age, because everybody has a smartphone and everybody has ideas and social media and everything, sometimes you're the artist, sometimes you're the audience, and sometimes you're a little bit of both. And so those relationships about creativity and how you make things and who made things, because what do you do when things are a collaboration between a group of people that are a crowd that isn't associated in any formal way? And then how do you overlay, now we have all this technical ability to create something that doesn't necessarily involve humans? It means that perhaps our notions of what it means to be creative and what is a creative product might have to change in a pretty radically different way.
I want to ask you to take that exact thought, but apply it in the realm of cities and towns. Really, I guess my question is, what education, what experiences should current or aspiring community leaders be signing up for today that will enable them to responsibly and effectively lead their communities. At a local level, where do you think leaders need to grasp this animal?
So job one, and today, is to develop a conceptual framework for it. Something that is a way that you're going to look at all of this change and not be the puppy chasing your tail, or being distracted by every new toy that comes along, but being very clear about what it is that you're trying to accomplish and how you want to get there. And to think about AI and some of these changes happening conceptually, that's the first thing that you have to get your head around, is sort of like, well, just like my copyright example, if you take copyright as a thing that it's part of the wallpaper, right? It's part of the infrastructure. It's how we do business, right? Well, what happens when you blow that up? You have to have a different whole set of structure, framework, infrastructure to be able to think about what it means to own creative property. Likewise, when you're thinking about your town or your city and how it functions, you have to blow up a bunch of thinking that you do right now, what you know, right? Like, to go back to Jensen Huang for a moment. Last fall, he told the Deal Book Summit at the New York Times at the conference that his processor is the processor that basically is the best processor for driving AI machines, right? And they keep iterating new versions of the processors, and they're significantly faster. Well, a few generations back, he decided, well, the AI is probably better than the human architects at being able to design these processors. So he had them do it. And he's a coder himself, a developer himself, and he starts looking at the code and he goes, wait a second, this breaks all the rules. Like, the shortcuts that they're taking in the programming code are breaking the things that we all know. I'm not comfortable with that. So the biggest change for him was to conceptually understand that even though he was an expert coder and knew how this stuff worked, that the machines were going to actually figure out a way to do it that were perhaps completely counterintuitive, and that on some level he had to just trust that this was going to be a better thing. And in fact, it produced faster processors, more efficient processors, at a factor better, right? Rather than the iterative human better. And so conceptually now they're at the point several generations out, which no human could really actually understand it, let alone be able to improve on it. So it's looking at a complicated system like a city or a town or a company and being able to say, wait a second, we think that the org chart ought to look like this, but wait, actually, things don't work that way anymore. So, for instance, there's this great term I've been hearing lately, which is called the creative generalist. Creative generalist. So, right now, all sorts of professions and companies have divided into silos with people with deep expertise in whatever the thing is that is their job, right? And so you want to hire an expert. We do that in medicine, right? You go to a cardiologist rather than one general doctor who takes care of everything, right? Because the cardiologist has specialized information. In the future, we're not going to have cardiologists. Why? Because most of the specialized information is stuff that the machine just will absorb. It has all of that repository of reasoning and functioning in an expertise that we want to be able to access, and we want to make it actionable. But here's the real challenge, is we have to know that that is the expertise and that is the agent that we need to activate. So instead of hiring experts in a place, we need to start hiring people who are really good at seeing a problem and then figuring out which AI or which tool will effectively do all of that specialized kind of spreadsheets and, data analysis and all of that stuff, and be able to put it together in a way that's harnessed towards the thing that we want to accomplish. You're looking for thinkers, which is the sort of essential human part of this, informed by specialists, which we turn over to the machines. And that requires thinking about how do you organize the expertise in any system that you're running in a way.
I want to see if I can't distill this down a little bit, Doug. This is big thinking. The ability to do the calculations, to look at all the variables and the permutations of how they may play out over time. I get how that's going to be useful for cancer research, for climate change, for all kinds of systems, technology improvements. I get it. In a city or town, the structure that we have for making community decisions is largely a city council or town council, maybe 5 or 7 or whatever is the number of people, where we say they are people who come from different walks of life, different perspectives, different education, and that publicly they're going to receive information and deliberate together and try to make the best decisions they can. What it sounds like you're saying is AI can still do all of the detailed work that it needs to do all of that analysis, but for those people on the council, it sounds like it's going to be even more important that they are able to articulate desired outcomes, and what else? The values that go into it, and what else would you put on that list? What else does a city council, a town council need to get really good at so that they don't become unmoored or driven by the technology itself?
Yeah, and that what you just said right at the very last thing that you said is the really important thing, right? Is if you're driven by technology, you can go off into very unpleasant places, right? Sort of the central planning idea, which often seems to go awry. You're right. I mean, that actually calls for having city councilors, having mayors, having people who are setting the mood, the atmosphere, the values, what kind of community do we want to be, being able to distill a lot of disparate opinions and ideas and use that as a way to be able to reach for the right tools to be able to do it. Like, how much of city council time is taken up with, man, we just don't have the resources to do this. We gotta take really difficult decisions, right? And so it feels like so often that it's a governing by loss or scarcity, right? And basically what we're doing is we don't get to do all the things we would love to do to make a really vibrant community. We're figuring out what we can least take away so that we spend the money that we have available for us, or the resources we have available for us, in ways that are not dystopian, right? If not utopian, at least not dystopian. And that's a real difficult balance. What I think AI will do is, because it will be able to, in a sense, ingest all of the information, the sensors, the everything, it will monitor the health of the community in a much more precise kind of way, so that you could start to look at your city or your town or your community as an organism, that when something goes awry down here over in the organism, sort of resources are matched to sort of thinking about that, and it weighs the proportional response towards the rest of the system, right? Because it understands the complexity of the system that you're trying to do. It allocates road fixing and all of that in a way that's much more efficient and that is a lot more equitable. So I think these tools are going to be incredibly powerful, But if you just chase after the tools, you're going to go off into all sorts of weird places. We did that in the beginning of the digital age. What's really most important is to figure out conceptually how it is that you want to approach the kind of change that's coming that we've never experienced before. And we think that we've had change before. And how are you going to be able to both recognize the opportunities and avoid the pitfalls?
If you could design a new experiment, and in particular, I'm thinking about an experiment in cities and towns. What is something that you might conceive for combining technology, arts, journalism, and the impact at a local level? If you were going to create an experiment right now, what kind of a thing would you be interested in finding out?
I think that's a good question. I think that if you look at most communities now, they're organized into delivery of service, right? So you have somebody who's delivering, the water service. You have somebody who's delivering road repair and road building. You have somebody who's delivering, recreational activities, right? And those are all sort of basic functions. And so our governments are organized around the Department of Transportation and the Department of whatever. What if we reconceived those as the experience that we want the people living in our community to have, right? So it was the department, this is a silly one, but the Department of Happiness would be, in a sense, figuring out how the complexity of roads and parks and density of buildings and, all of that happen. But instead of being organized under the technical function of delivering the service, it was the organism itself, the town itself, was organized around a series of ideas that it was important to. And those might not look like our traditional organization right now, right? The Department of Health would not be just about delivering medical service when something has gone wrong. It might be about delivering service about how do we create healthy people? How do we make sure that there's quality food and so you're tethering the basic functions of a community to a set of ideas rather than a delivery of service. Does that make sense?
Yeah, in fact, it matches up perfectly with a podcast interview I did a few weeks ago with the CEO of Michigan Humane, who made the point that in his strategic planning, they've done away with chasing statistics, and they instead focus on outcomes. And they came up with 3 principles for the organization. And if they can come up with something that pursues all 3 of those outcomes at the same time, they do it. And that's it, because that's what they're about. And so you're kind of saying the same thing is, if we can identify outcomes, if we can identify the happiness, the health, the prosperity, and we inject into it values like fairness and equity and access or whatever else it might be, that the AI actually might introduce us to some new ways of achieving things that frankly have confounded humans for all of our existence.
It takes care of that's a great way of putting it. It takes care of the technical complexity.
Doug, we have to begin to wrap up, and I have to ask you one last question. I don't know about you, I happen to be a big Star Trek fan. And yes, as you've been talking about all of this, I am reminded of the marketing tagline that went for Star Trek: The Motion Picture, which I think came out in 1979. And, here, this is a movie that's all about technology and exploration and adventure at the far distant points of space. But the marketing tagline for Star Trek: The Motion Picture was, "The human adventure is just beginning." Do you see that the human adventure is what's beginning right now, that this is about values and interpersonal relationships? Is this going to change the way people engage with each other?
Oh, I think that that's true. I mean, one could imagine, for instance, that instead of, we have all sorts of weird systems right now, right? Why is your health insurance tied to your job? Right. I mean, there's a sort of historical reason for that, but that's kind of insane that we do that, right? Why is your job the definition of who you are? Out in the world, right? For most people doing kind of, grocery clerk or, whatever, the job may be interesting to them, but if they don't do that job, then they don't eat. I think that once you remove that, a whole lot of the sort of annoying stuff that needs to get done to accomplish things, that frees you up to do much higher level kinds of things, so that I can imagine, it's like, I don't need to know how my car works to be able to enjoy driving in a car. I don't have to know how to fly a plane or the principles of aerodynamics to be able to take advantage of being able to get on a flight and get somewhere. Yes. I don't need to know how my computer works, merely that it actually does some pretty amazing things, right? This is just another stage of that, where at a much higher level, it reduces a lot of really kind of things that we have found difficult to things that we can control and to use to go to levels that we can't really yet imagine what they are. And the one last thing I'd like to say about this is that I think one of the things that a lot of people made the mistake of in the digital revolution was that here we can make all these incredible things, and that's going to change us, right? And what we learned early on with a lot of failures, a lot of products that didn't go anywhere, was that human nature actually doesn't change. That human nature leads us to use tools that make sense to help us accomplish things that we already know that we want to do or that are informed by our values. They don't change us in that way, or at least right away. And I think that that's a very good way to kind of go into the AI, the new AI world, is to know that even though amazing new things are going to be possible, we don't have to do them, and we probably won't do them unless they're things that we want to do. And so the challenge for any leader is to figure out, really, really, really bear down on what are your values, what is it that you want to make, and then find the right things to do it. And chances are now we're expanding our tool base in just an unbelievable way.
Doug, I think you may have just harshed my mellow, because I thought I was bringing us down to a gentle landing of, yes, this technology is going to help us solve so many problems so we can focus on the human things like love and artistic expression and understanding each other and these uniquely human qualities that we have. Because if the AI is going to be used for all of the things that are just in human nature, then unfortunately, it's going to be war, it's going to be outrage, it's going to be, power plays and beating people up.
We haven't even touched on all the terrifying possibilities of this, which is why, you saw those leaders sign the, hey, be careful about AI, right? There are people who actually think it's going to be the end of civilization. And that's because you put the tools, the everyday tools of being able to launch drones from anywhere, and suddenly you've got people in impoverished countries being able to use high technology and do, or create chemicals that will destroy us, or
autonomous robot soldiers. I mean, there's a lot of that coming.
Well, yeah. I mean, it makes it possible for somebody to poison our water supply with just the click of a mouse, right? So that's terrifying.
What gives you hope for the future?
Oh, I think that we've always been, as a species, an optimistic lot. Look at the progress, the amazing things that we've accomplished in the last, several centuries, and I think the inexorable march is towards a better kind of existence rather than a worse kind. And I every time I start to think about the possibilities and what you can do, it's just like, wow, it's very exciting.
Doug McLennan, thanks so much for this conversation. I'm hoping that we can check back with you sometime and continue this conversation. This is going to be changing radically in the future. Thanks so much for your time.
Great fun. Thanks a lot.
Again, my sincere thanks and appreciation and best happy 25th anniversary wishes to Doug McLennan of ArtsJournal. You'll find a link to ArtsJournal in today's program notes, along with a link to Doug's diacritical blog. This episode was produced by Kerry Lengel and edited by Nick Living the Dream Tantillo. Jenna Maisel is our production assistant. Our executive producer is John Little. I'm Matt Lehrman of Social Prosperity Partners. If you have a question, comment, or story to share, reach me at 602-688-2724 or podcast at socialprosperity.us. I'd love to hear from you. We'll be back soon with another Community Catalyst.